150 American prisoners of war herded into air raid shelters at a camp on the island of Palawan, doused in gasoline, set on fire while they were still trapped inside. The ones who managed to break free, running from the flames, were machine-gunned at the fence line. Only 11 men survived, 11 out of roughly 150. This happened in December 1944. Word of it reached American command within days, carried by escaped survivors who had swum, crawled, and hidden their way to safety. It raised one question that could not wait. If the Japanese did this once, with American forces closing in, what happens to every other camp still holding prisoners? At a camp called Cabanatuan, more than 500 men were still waiting, still surviving, still completely unaware how close they had already come to the exact same fate.
Cabanatuan. At its peak, this camp had held over 5,000 men. By January 1945, most had already been shipped to Japan as slave labor, crammed into the holds of so-called hell ships, transports with no markings, no protection, some of which were sunk by American submarines that had no idea prisoners were aboard. What remained at Cabanatuan were the ones too sick, too weak, too broken to be worth transporting anywhere, just over 500 men, survivors of Bataan, survivors of a death march that had already tried to kill them once. 3 years of captivity, malnutrition that had left some men weighing under 90 pounds, disease, beriberi, malaria, dysentery, spreading through barracks with no real medicine to fight it. Guards who had made brutality so routine, the men barely flinched anymore. They had survived everything the Japanese had thrown at them so far, but survival at Cabanatuan had never once meant safety. To understand how these men got here, you have to go back further. April 1942. Nearly 80,000 American and Filipino defenders surrendered on the Bataan Peninsula after 99 days holding a siege Japan expected to end in 50. What followed became known as the Bataan Death March. 60 to 80 miles, depending on where a man's march began, walked in tropical heat with no food, almost no water. Men who collapsed were bayoneted where they fell. Men who tried to drink from roadside puddles, sometimes containing the bodies of those who died there before them, were shot on the spot. Somewhere between 5,000 and 10,000 men never made it to a camp at all. The men who did survive that march were sent to places like Cabanatuan. So by January 1945, every single one of these 500 men had already survived one death sentence. Now they were about to find out if they'd survive a second. By late January 1945, American forces were closing in on Luzon fast, which meant Japanese commanders had a decision to make: move the remaining prisoners or eliminate them before liberation ever reached the gate. After Palawan, American intelligence had no doubt which option the enemy might choose. A guerrilla leader named Major Robert Lapham, a man who had spent years leading resistance fighters across Luzon rather than surrender in 1942, rode 30 miles alone through Japanese-held territory himself on horseback just to reach 6th Army headquarters with a proposal: send a force in, now, before it's too late. Lieutenant General Walter Kruger listened and authorized something that, on paper, looked almost suicidal. Here's what that plan actually looked like on paper. A little over 120 Rangers, pulled from Companies C and F of the 6th Ranger Battalion, 14 Alamo Scouts, marching 30 miles behind enemy lines, through territory where Japanese troop concentrations in the surrounding region were estimated as high as 9,000 men. 9,000, against a rescue force of roughly 130 Americans. Lieutenant Colonel Henry Mucci was given command, a ranger officer so meticulous about planning his own men had nicknamed him Little MacArthur, not always as a compliment. He would need every bit of that obsessive precision, because the math on this mission did not favor the men about to attempt it, no matter how it was calculated.
But Mucci's Rangers were not going in alone. Waiting to join them were more than 200 Filipino guerrilla fighters. Some accounts put the number closer to 286 once every unit was counted. Led by Captain Juan Pajota and Captain Eduardo Joson, men who knew this land in a way no American ever could. Every trail, every river crossing, every village where one barking dog could get the entire mission killed. Without them, this raid does not happen. Full stop. The guerrillas would guide the Rangers through terrain that would otherwise be impossible to cross undetected, gather intelligence no American reconnaissance could gather alone, and move through villages as neighbors rather than strangers. When the moment came, they would be asked to do something even more dangerous than simply guiding a rescue mission through the dark. Before a single shot could be fired, someone needed eyes inside that camp. Alamo Scouts, dressed in borrowed Filipino farm clothing, slipped to within 300 yards of the compound, pretending to be locals working nearby fields, sketching guard routines, counting watchtowers, learning the exact rhythm of when guards changed shifts. They found something that changed the entire plan: a shed containing Japanese light tanks. Nobody had known those tanks were there. If the raid went in blind, those tanks alone could turn a rescue into a massacre in minutes. The scouts marked the shed's exact location to be handed to bazooka teams before the assault. It was one dangerous secret uncovered. It would not be the last. Then came the moment that nearly ended everything. The night before the planned attack, scouts spotted movement on the road beside the camp. Not a patrol, a full Japanese division, moving past all night long before finally settling down at dawn to hide from American aircraft. If the raid went forward as scheduled, the rescue force would walk directly into thousands of enemy soldiers, bivouacked less than a mile from their approach route. "Our bacon will be out for frying," one scout radioed back, "if we collide with those bastards." Mucci had a choice, and neither option was good. Attack anyway, into a trap nobody had planned for, or wait and risk that the prisoners might already be moved, or worse. Every hour of hesitation cut both ways.
Could the prisoners have been moved? Mucci asked, according to accounts from that night. Nobody could answer him. No one had gotten close enough yet to look inside the camp itself. Every hour of delay was an hour the enemy division might discover them. Every hour of delay was an hour closer to another Palawan. The scout leader made a suggestion that took real nerve. Wait 24 hours. Let the division move on first. Mucci agreed, radioing headquarters to push the air support back a full day. It was, in hindsight, the right call, but it meant 500 men would spend one more night in that camp, not knowing rescue was already this close. The night before they finally moved, Mucci gathered his rangers inside a small church in the village of Balingkarin. What he said to them next would be remembered by every man in that room for the rest of his life. "These boys," he told them, "have been beaten and starved for nearly 3 years. If they can't walk to the river, carry them. We don't leave one of them behind, not a single one." Then he asked his men to take an oath, to die fighting if it came to that, rather than fail the men waiting inside that camp. January 30, 1945. 1945 hours, 7:45 in the evening.
That was the exact moment they would finally attack. Every plan was set, every position assigned. What happened in the next 30 minutes would decide whether 500 men lived to see morning. To pull this off, they needed a distraction. A P-61 Black Widow night fighter began circling directly over the camp, faking engine trouble, again and again, dropping to just 200 feet, performing wild, sputtering maneuvers that made every Japanese guard look up, convinced they were about to watch an American plane crash directly into the compound. Every eye in that camp was pointed at the sky, which meant no one was watching the tree line, where more than 100 Rangers and Filipino guerrillas were already moving silently into position, closer with every passing minute. At exactly 7:45 p.m., it began. 15 seconds. That's how long it took to neutralize every guard tower and pillbox in that camp. One Ranger shot the lock off the main gate with a pistol. Bazooka teams hit the shed where those hidden tanks had been discovered days earlier, destroyed before they could ever be used against the rescue force. Japanese soldiers trying to flee in trucks were cut down before they cleared the compound gates. Inside, the sound was deafening. Gunfire, explosions, men shouting orders in 2 languages at once. Outside, for the 500 men who'd waited 3 years for this exact moment, it must have sounded like the end of the world, or the beginning of the rest of their lives. While the camp itself was being taken, a different battle was happening at a bridge over the Cabu River. Captain Juan Pajota and his Filipino guerrillas. Their job? Stop any Japanese reinforcements from that division nearby from ever reaching the camp in time. They held that bridge for hours, against a force that could have overwhelmed them completely if it had committed fully. If Pajota's men had failed here, if that bridge had fallen, everything happening inside the camp would have been for nothing. 500 rescued men and their rescuers would have been trapped between 2 Japanese forces with nowhere left to run and no way home. Inside the camp, something unexpected happened. The prisoners didn't run toward their rescuers, they hid from them. 3 years of Japanese cruelty had taught them one lesson above all others: trust nothing, not even the sight of American uniforms in the dark. Many assumed this was a trick, a final cruel joke before execution. Rangers had to physically pull terrified skeletal men out of hiding places, carry them. Some men weighed so little, a single ranger carried 2 of them at once, one slung on each side. Freedom, after 3 years, didn't look the way anyone expected it to look. It looked like men too broken and too afraid to believe it was actually real. Among those rescued was a colonel named James Duckworth. He'd broken his left arm at the very start of the war, back in 1942. During the rescue itself, running toward freedom, he fell and broke his other arm. Both arms broken, 3 years apart, on the exact same road toward the exact same freedom. Small, specific human details like that are what these 500 men actually carried out of that camp. Not just malnutrition and disease reduced to statistics on a report. Broken bodies. Men who had survived everything imaginable for nearly 3 years and were now, finally, being carried towards something that felt almost too good to trust. Getting 500 broken men 30 miles back to safety required help nobody had planned for in advance. Filipino civilians, all along the entire route, brought their own carabao carts, wooden ox carts meant for hauling rice, not men. The convoy started with 26 of them. By the time they reached American lines at Talavera, more than 100 carts were in that line. Some accounts count as many as 106. Villagers kept adding more, unprompted, simply because they could see how many men couldn't walk on their own. In the villages along the way, guerrillas muzzled barking dogs and caged chickens, so no sound would give away 500 escaping prisoners to any Japanese patrols still searching the countryside for them. They reached friendly lines by dawn on January 31st. This did not come without cost. 2 rangers were killed. One, a soldier named Fisher, died waiting for a medical evacuation plane that never arrived in time. His last words, according to the men beside him, "Good luck on the way out." The other, a ranger named Sweezy, was struck in the back by friendly fire in the chaos and confusion of the assault. 20 of Pajota's guerrillas were wounded holding that bridge, 2 Alamo Scouts, 2 more rangers. Estimates of Japanese dead that night range from 530 to well over 1,000, once every soldier caught on the roads and at the bridge is counted. Every number on that casualty list represents the price of getting 500 broken men the 30 miles home.
When word reached General Douglas MacArthur, he called it the most satisfying moment of the entire Pacific campaign. No incident, he said, had given him such satisfaction. The mission was brilliantly successful. Mucci and Captain Robert Prince, who led the ground assault, both received the Distinguished Service Cross at a ceremony on March 3rd. The Alamo Scouts received a Presidential Unit citation. Every other officer and select enlisted men received the Silver Star. But no medal was ever created for what the Filipino guerrillas did that night. Without Pajota's men holding that bridge, without Joson's fighters guiding the way through hostile terrain, without villagers appearing with carts nobody asked them to bring, this rescue does not happen. History remembers the Rangers. It should remember all of them equally.
The Great Raid became the largest successful POW rescue in American military history. Within 3 weeks, similar rescues followed at Santo Tomas and Los Baños, both built directly on lessons learned at Cabanatuan. 10 Rangers and 2 Alamo Scouts even met President Franklin Roosevelt in the Oval Office that March, one of his final acts before his death the following month. Hollywood noticed too. The raid appears in the 1945 film Back to Bataan, starring John Wayne, and again 6 decades later in the 2005 film simply titled The Great Raid. But strip away the medals, the White House visit, and the movies, and what's left is simpler than any of it. 500 men who should have died Palawan style instead walked home, because a Filipino guerrilla commander chose to hold a bridge he didn't have to hold.
Somewhere in the Philippines tonight, there's a quiet stretch of road that once carried more than 100 carabao carts, each one holding a man who'd been given up for dead. Most of the guerrillas who made that possible were never given a medal, never had a movie made just about them. They simply held a bridge, muzzled a dog, handed over a cart, because 500 strangers needed to get home, and they were the only ones who could get them there. One of the rangers on that mission, a young officer named Arthur Simons, would go on to lead an even more famous rescue raid decades later in Vietnam. The lineage of this kind of courage doesn't end. It just keeps finding the next bridge worth holding.